My name is Humphrey Whitman, and I am 77 years old. My life in Carrollton would be peaceful and measured if it weren't for one thing: my family. Or rather, what's left of it. My son Lloyd and his wife Prudence. They say old age is no fun, but I'd argue old age can be quite bearable if you're not surrounded by vultures in the guise of relatives. I live in a two-story house that I built with my own hands 45 years ago. At that time, I was full of energy and worked as a design engineer at a company that built warships. I wouldn't say it was a dream job, but it provided enough money to provide for my family and save for a rainy day. My Evelyn always had a way of stretching a dollar so that it seemed to turn into two. She was a smart woman, practical. 6 years ago, cancer took her from me. Fast, 3 months. I've lived alone ever since, except for daily visits from Lloyd and Prudence, who moved next door 2 years ago. "We'll be closer to you, Dad. You need help at your age," Lloyd said with that special intonation one uses when explaining something to a child or someone with dementia. Except I'm neither. My mind is as clear as ever, and my body, though not as flexible as it was in my youth, is still quite functional. It's a cool April morning. I'm sitting in my office watching through the window as Lloyd fiddles with his new car, the big SUV he bought a month ago. I wonder how he can afford such an expensive toy on an accountant's salary at a construction firm. I'm guessing, though. Lloyd is 52, and he's always been a boy with demands beyond his means. My gaze moves involuntarily to the wall where my pride hangs, part of my watch collection. 20 years ago, when I retired, Evelyn gave me my first watch, a gold Omega Constellation 1965. "You need a hobby, Humphrey," she said then, "or you'll drive me crazy with your grouchiness." It was love at first sight. The precision of the movement, the beauty of the workmanship, the story contained in every detail. All of it captured me completely. Gradually, one watch turned into 5, then into 10, and now I have 63 of them. Each one has its own story, its own character. I know everything about them: where they were made, who they belong to, what technical features make them unique. My favorite pair is a gold Vacheron Constantine pocket watch that used to belong to a British naval officer. They survived 2 world wars and are still accurate to within a few seconds a day. I bought them at auction for a sum I prefer not to think about. Evelyn almost threw me out of the house at the time, but then she got over it. She's always been able to accept my oddities. A knock on the door interrupts my musings. "Daddy, are you in there?" Prudence's voice sounded sweet and luscious, the way it always does when she wants something from me. "Come in." The door's unlocked. Prudence walks in, dressed in that pink tracksuit that I refer to myself as the flamingo suit of prey. She's 49, but she clings fiercely to her passing youth. "Lloyd and I are going to a barbecue at the Robinsons on Saturday. You remember the Robinsons, don't you?" She smiles, showing perfect white teeth. "Don't you want to come with us?" I'm well aware of this tactic. They invite me somewhere knowing I'm going to say no. Then they pretend to be very disappointed, but they actually sigh in relief. "Thank you, Prudence, but I think I'll stay home." "Oh, Papa," she said, her voice taking on a tinge of feigned sadness. "You need to socialize more. You've been so withdrawn since Mom died." She never called Evelyn by her first name. Always Mom, as if trying to emphasize a closeness that never existed. Evelyn didn't really feel sorry for Prudence, though she tried to be polite. "There's something predatory about her, Humphrey," she'd said, and as always, she was right. "So, I'm quite happy with my level of socializing," I replied, turning to my desk, where the disassembled Hamilton watch I cleaned last night lies. Prudence comes closer, her gaze sliding over the clock on the wall. "You spend so much time with these things." She waves her hand nonchalantly toward my collection. "They must be worth a fortune?" There it is, the real reason for her visit: battlefield reconnaissance. "They're of value to collectors," I answer evasively. I'd long ago stopped telling them how much my watch was really worth. Numbers would only whet their appetite. "Lloyd is worried about your safety," she continued. "Keeping something that valuable at home is a risk. Maybe you should put them in a safety deposit box. And deny yourself the pleasure of seeing them every day?" I shake my head. "No, Prudence. They're safe here." "But what if there's a robbery or a fire?" she insists. I have a good alarm system and insurance, I reply, feeling the irritation rising in me. And I'd rather take the risk of enjoying my collection while I'm still alive. A shadow of displeasure flickers across her face, but is quickly replaced by the professional smile of the sales agent she was before she married Lloyd. Of course, Dad. I'm just worried about you. Lying, of course. The only thing she's worried about is when they'll own it all. She and Lloyd think I don't notice them discussing my death. When Daddy's gone, after Daddy's gone, these are phrases I often hear when they think I'm napping in my chair on the veranda. I'm perfectly fine, Prudence, I say, turning back to my watch. Tell Lloyd the grass in the backyard is too tall. He promised to cut it last week. Oh, she looks a little confused by the change of subject. Yeah, sure. I'll tell him. He's just been really busy lately. I understand. I nod. We all have our priorities. When Prudence leaves, I breathe a sigh of relief. Every conversation with her or Lloyd is a game of chess. They make a move, I make a move back. They try to figure out how much longer they have to wait. I pretend I don't get their hints. Sometimes I wonder where I went wrong with Lloyd's upbringing. Maybe it's that I worked too hard when he was a kid, or that I let Evelyn spoil him, or maybe it's just his nature to always want more than he has. After Evelyn died, our relationship became even more strained. Lloyd was counting on me to sell the house and move in with them, or into a nursing home, which in his eyes is apparently the same thing. When I refused, he was visibly disappointed, but quickly changed tactics. We'll move closer to you, Dad, he then said with the same fake concern that his wife had. And they did move, to the house across the street that I had bought them as a wedding present 25 years ago. The house they rented out all those years while they lived downtown. Now they come to my house every day, bringing me food, even though I'm a great cook myself, checking to see if I've taken my medications, most of which I don't take because I don't need them, and unobtrusively inquiring about my will. Have you updated your will, Dad? It's been 6 years since Mom died, Lloyd asks about once a month, as if I can forget how long it's been since Evelyn left. The truth is, I did update the will. Right after I noticed Lloyd looking at my watch with the same expression on his face that he used to look at Christmas presents when I was a kid. But I'm in no hurry to give him the details. Let him guess. I go back to work on Hamilton. The mechanism of the clock calms me. It has an order and logic that is so lacking in human relationships. Every cog has its place and its function. Nothing superfluous, nothing missing. If only life were as predictable. Through the window, I see Lloyd finishing up with the car and heading toward my house. Prudence must have already told him about our conversation. Now he's coming in with another dose of fake concern. I sigh and prepare myself for another game of chess. Maybe today I'll hint to him that I'm going to revise my will. Just to see the look on his face. Small pleasures are all I have left. But even as I think about these mind games, a part of me is sad. Because once upon a time, a long time ago, I loved my son. And I guess somewhere deep down inside I still do. It's just that that love is now mixed with bitterness and disappointment, like an old whiskey that's been left open too long. The bell at the front door jingles, and I hear Lloyd enter the house without waiting for an invitation. Dad? His voice booms down the hallway. I slowly close the clock case and prepare myself. Another day, another party, and time, as always, is on my side, at least for now. First to disappear are the cufflinks, old silver with small sapphires, a gift from Evelyn for our 30th anniversary. I remembered exactly storing them in the top drawer of my dresser, in a little velvet box. But when I went to my old friend Silas' funeral, they weren't there. Humphrey, you just forgot where you put them, Lloyd said, helping me look. It's normal at your age. My age. He always emphasizes my age like it's a diagnosis of a terminal illness. I didn't argue, but I was sure I hadn't forgotten. I never forget anything, especially when it comes to things related to Evelyn. Then the silver flask given to me by my coworkers at retirement went missing. I only used it a few times, but treasured it as a memento of my years on the job. Then the old coins that I collected with my father as a boy disappeared. Not particularly valuable from a collector's point of view, but priceless to me. Every time Lloyd or Prudence shook their heads and talked about age-related forgetfulness. Each time I nodded in agreement, but suspicion grew inside. And then I noticed a change in my watch collection. The Movado pocket watch was on the wrong shelf. A Longan with a rose gold bracelet was turned with the dial facing the wrong way. My precious Vacheron Constantin was moved an inch to the left of its usual place. Most people wouldn't notice little things like that, but I'm not most people. I know the placement of every watch in my collection to the nearest millimeter. I wipe the glass of the display cases every Sunday, and the location of each piece is as familiar to me as the location of my own fingers. That evening, as I sat in my chair looking at my collection, I realized that someone was looking through it on a regular basis. Someone with access to my home. Someone in my inner circle. It was a long shot. "Daddy, I brought you some fresh scones from Mrs. Courtney." "You love her baked goods." Lloyd came in the next morning without knocking, as usual. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a crossword puzzle from yesterday's paper. "Thank you," I answered without looking up. "Put it on the table. Are you all right?" He tilted his head to the side, studying me. "You look tired." "I didn't sleep well." It was true. I spent half the night thinking about how to catch the thief. "Maybe we should see Dr. Peterson." "I can make you an appointment," he said, sitting on the edge of his chair, feigning concern. "I don't need to. It's just age." I used his own weapon against him. Lloyd smiled uncertainly and nodded. "By the way, Prudence and I were thinking maybe you should hire a housekeeper. Someone to come a couple times a week, clean up, cook. You don't have to work so hard." There it is. Another stranger in my house. Another pair of eyes examining my things, assessing their value. "I'm doing fine on my own," I cut him off. "But Dad," I said, "I'm doing it on my own." My pencil hand shook, leaving a dark line on the paper. Lloyd raised his hands in a conciliatory gesture. Okay. I was just making a suggestion." After he left, I sat for a long time, staring at the ruined crossword puzzle. Something was going on in my house, and I had to figure out what it was. Perhaps I was getting paranoid, but my experience told a different story. In engineering, if something doesn't look right, it's wrong. Parts can't move on their own. The next day, I visited an electronics store on the other side of town, away from the prying eyes of the neighbors. A young salesman with a thin goatee showed me several options for hidden cameras. "This is our most popular model," he said, handing me a device slightly larger than a matchbox. "It's motion activated and records directly to a memory card. Battery lasts about a week." "Is there anything else less conspicuous?" I asked. The salesman grinned and pulled a box from under the counter. "This one is the bomb. It looks like an ordinary wall clock, but inside is a camera with excellent resolution. No one will suspect a trick. The clock is like a surveillance camera." The irony didn't escape me. "I'll take it," I said, pulling out my wallet. "It's a good choice. It's easy to install. Just hang it on the wall and you're done. It's all controlled through a smartphone app." There was a catch. I didn't have a smartphone, just an old push-button phone that I used to make calls. "Do you have something that can be connected to a computer?" I asked. The salesman scratched his beard. "Of course we do, but it's more for professionals. Do you really need something that's sophisticated?" There was a look in his eyes that I'd seen all too often lately. "Man, are you sure you can handle it?" "I spent 35 years designing control systems for warships, son," I said in a steady voice. "I think I can handle the security camera." His eyes widened. "Understood, sir. Excuse me. We'll find something suitable in a moment." I ended up leaving the store with two cameras, one disguised as a wall clock and the other a tiny device that could be hidden almost anywhere, both connected to my computer. At home, I mounted the camera clock on the wall opposite my collection. It blended in perfectly. Another clock in the home of the person who collects them didn't raise any suspicions. I mounted the second camera on a bookshelf, pointing it at the desk where I usually disassembled and cleaned my watch movements. For the first 2 days, the cameras recorded nothing unusual. I came and went, sometimes stopping in front of the display case to admire the collection. On the second day, Prudence came in, brought the mail, and quickly left without even glancing in the direction of the watches. On the third day, I deliberately left them alone in the house, saying I was going for my annual physical. Instead, I went to the library where I spent several hours looking through old watchmaking magazines. When I got home, I went straight up to the study and checked the camera footage. And there it was, the proof I'd been looking for and dreading finding at the same time. Lloyd and Prudence entered the office 20 minutes after I left. At first, they just looked around, checking to see if the house was really empty. Then Lloyd walked over to the clock cabinet and carefully opened the glass door. "Be careful," Prudence said, looking around nervously. "If he notices that anything is wrong—" "He won't," Lloyd said, carefully removing my gold Patek Philippe from its stand. "He's already confused about the days of the week, not to mention the placement of the clocks." It wasn't true, and that lie made something inside me clench. I wasn't confused about the days of the week. I knew exactly what day it was, the day my own son betrayed my trust. At the recording, Lloyd carefully handed the watch to Prudence, who pulled a camera out of her bag and took several pictures from different angles. "How much do you think it's worth?" she asked, handing the watch back to Lloyd. "At least 20,000, judging by the auctions," he replied, scrutinizing the movement through the glass. "And that's just the one. He has over 60 of them." "Oh, God," Prudence breathed out. "We could—" "Shh," Lloyd cut her off. "Just take the pictures. I'll contact the appraiser tomorrow." They went methodically through the collection, photographing each watch, discussing its potential value in whispers, as if they were afraid the walls would hear. Lloyd was particularly interested in my pocket watch, which he said was the easiest to sell to private collectors. I watched the tape, and my hands shook, not from age, but from anger. They were planning to sell my collection, my pride, my passion, what I'd spent 2 decades collecting, investing not only my money but my soul. "We have to act fast," Lloyd said, putting the last watch back in its place. "Who knows how much longer he'll last?" "Lloyd!" Prudence shushed him. "Don't talk about your father like that." "Why?" He shrugged. "It's true, he's 77, and the doctors say his heart isn't in the best condition. We have to be prepared." I froze. What doctors? I hadn't shared information about my health with them. My heart was perfectly fine, as far as I knew, except, of course, that it had just been shattered by betrayal. "Still, it's not nice to say that," Prudence insisted, but there was no sincerity in her voice. "What if someone hears?" "Who?" "The neighbors. His friends who were all but gone." Lloyd closed the display case and wiped the glass carefully, removing his fingerprints. "No one will know. We'll just prepare ahead of time so there won't be any problems with the probate valuation later." "What about his will?" Prudence asked, putting the camera back in her bag. "Are you sure it was left to us?" "The latest version is yes," Lloyd nodded. "I checked last year. But he could change it at any moment, so we need to be careful. As long as he thinks we care about him, we'll be fine." "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Peterson," Prudence suggested it, "about his, condition." Lloyd rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Not yet. But hold that thought. If he becomes suspicious or wants to change the will, we may have to speed things up." "Speed things up? What do you mean?" Prudence sounded worried. "Declare him incompetent, of course." Lloyd smiled his usual smile that I'd once thought sincere. "What were you thinking?" Prudence laughed nervously. "Nothing. Let's get out of here before he comes back." I watched them leave the room, closing the door carefully behind them, and felt something inside me die. Trust? Love? Hope that there was any good left in my son? Closing the video file, I sat motionless for a long time, staring at the extinguished computer screen. In the reflection, I saw my face, old, tired, with deep wrinkles that seemed even deeper in the bluish light of the monitor. I looked 77, and it frightened me. Not because I was afraid of old age or death, but because I was afraid of weakness. Afraid of becoming the helpless old man that Lloyd and Prudence already thought I was. I turned the tape back on and watched it from beginning to end, memorizing every word, every gesture. They weren't just planning to sell my collection after I died. They were preparing for it now while I was still alive. Speed up the process. Declare me incompetent. There was a chill in those words. How long have they been planning this? How long had my own son been waiting for me to die, calculating how much he'd get? And what else were they discussing when I wasn't around? I went to the window and looked at the house across the street, their house that had once been my gift to them. There were lights on in the windows, and I could make out the silhouettes of Lloyd and Prudence in the kitchen. They were probably eating dinner, discussing their day, perhaps even planning their future. A future in which they would be rich thanks to the sale of my collection. Well, I had other plans. I went back to the computer and made several copies of the videotape. I saved one to a flash drive, which I hid in a stash behind the painting. Old-fashioned, but safe. Another he emailed to himself to an address Lloyd didn't know. A third I copied to an external hard drive, which I put in the safe with my most valuable watch. Then I sat down and began to write. The plan was forming in my head, crisp and precise like clockwork. Every detail in its place, every action calculated. They thought they were dealing with a weak old man. They were wrong. I didn't know exactly when they would decide to act, but I was sure of one thing. They would. And when that moment came, I would be ready. Because if I've learned anything in my 77 years of life, it's patience. And I've had more time than they thought. After the discovery of the betrayal, I kept a closer eye on Lloyd and Prudence. Installed another hidden camera in the hallway so I could see when they came and went. I started keeping a diary of their visits, noting exactly what they did and said. But most importantly, I checked my collection regularly, noting the slightest changes in the position of the clock. 2 weeks passed without incident. Lloyd and Prudence behaved as usual. They came in with their fake smiles, brought food I hadn't asked for, asked questions about my well-being with feigned concern. I answered them in the same way, pretending that I didn't suspect anything, that I still believed in their sincerity. It was excruciating at times, but I wouldn't let myself snap. The time was not yet right. In the third week of watching, I noticed that they began to whisper more often, exchanging glances when they thought I couldn't see. Their phone conversations became shorter and more tense if I happened to be nearby. Something was brewing. On Thursday, Lloyd showed up alone, without Prudence. That was unusual. Usually they showed up together or she showed up alone. "Daddy, I thought maybe you should get some air," he said, sitting down across from me at the kitchen table. "The weather's nice. We could go to the lake, just like old times." I looked out the window. It was a nice day indeed, clear and sunny, with a light breeze ruffling the maple leaves in the yard. "Not today, Lloyd." I shook my head. "I have things to do." "So, what kind of things?" He smiled, but there was impatience in his eyes. "You're retired, Dad. Your only business is to enjoy life." "I have an appointment with a watchmaker," I lied. "He has to look at the movement of my Vacheron Constantine." They were starting to lag. The lie was strategic. If they were planning to do something with my collection, the mention of an expert examining it might alert them. Lloyd frowned. "You didn't say you'd summoned a watchmaker. When's he coming?" "Around 3. I took a sip of tea, watching his reaction. "Why?" "Nothing." He shrugged, but I could see the muscles in his face tense. "Just wanted to spend some time with you." "Another time." I patted his arm, disgusted by my own hypocrisy. But that was a game two could play. Lloyd left 20 minutes later, having failed to accomplish his goal, whatever it was. I watched him closely through the window as he walked to his car. His shoulders were tense and his steps too quick for a casual visit. As soon as he was out of sight, I called my old friend Eugene, a former police detective who had retired 5 years ahead of me. "Eugene, I need your help," I said without preamble. "Do you still have the car with the tinted windows?" "I do," he answered with a touch of surprise in his voice. "Why?" "I'll tell you when I see you. Can you come to my place tonight? And you better park around the corner so you can't be seen from my yard." Eugene paused for a second, then chuckled. "You're intriguing, old fox. I'll be there in an hour." I trusted Eugene. We'd been friends for over 40 years, back from the days when we were both young fathers and our kids played together. He'd known Lloyd since he was in diapers, and though he'd never said so explicitly, I sensed that he, like Evelyn, had always seen something wary in my son. Exactly 1 hour later, as promised, Eugene called from the street. I quickly explained the situation, showed him the security footage, and told him my suspicions. "Damn it, Humphrey." Eugene shook his head when I was done. "Are you sure about this? Maybe they just wanted to appraise the collection for insurance or something?" "I know my son." I grinned bitterly. "And I heard what they said. It's not for insurance." Eugene sighed and rubbed the gray stubble on his chin. "What do you want me to do?" "Just be my eyes on the street. I suspect they might try to take the watch out when I'm not home. If you see anything suspicious, call me immediately." Eugene agreed, and we devised a simple surveillance plan. He would be on duty in his car with binoculars, and I would continue my usual behavior, pretending not to suspect anything. The next 2 days passed without incident. Eugene changed observation positions so as not to attract attention, and I continued my usual routine, only occasionally checking the collection for changes. And then Saturday came. I woke up with a feeling that something was going to happen today. I don't know why, just a premonition I've learned to trust over the many years of my life. Around noon, Eugene called. "Humphrey, they just left the house. Lloyd is carrying some kind of box. Looks like a wooden crate. Prudence is with him." My heart skipped a beat. "Do you see where they're going?" "They're getting into Lloyd's car." "Wait, they're pulling out onto Oak Street, heading downtown." "Follow them," I said, pulling on my coat. "I'll meet you downtown. Keep me posted." I hailed a cab quickly, a little too fast for someone my age, but the adrenaline was doing its job. On the way downtown, Eugene kept regular updates on Lloyd and Prudence's movements. They stopped at a traffic light on Main Street, turned onto Commerce Avenue, and parked near a row of stores in the old part of Carrollton. "They went into Goldstein's pawn shop," Eugene reported when I was a couple blocks away. "The one with the big gold sign." "I know the place," I replied. "I was there in 5 minutes." The cab stopped around the corner from the pawn shop. I paid and walked slowly down the street, trying not to attract attention. Goldstein's place was in an old brick building with large windows behind which jewelry and other valuables gleamed. I stopped across the street and peered through the glass into the interior. Lloyd and Prudence were standing at the counter. In front of them, on a velvet cushion, was a Watch My Watch. I would have recognized it from 1,000 others. A gold Patek Philippe, a platinum Vacheron Constantine, and a silver Movado, the jewels of my collection. Old man Goldstein, the pawnbroker, was looking at them through a magnifying glass, his bald head glistening under the bright light of the lamps. I knew him. I'd bought watch restoration parts from him several times. He was an honest businessman, as honest as his profession could be. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door and entered the pawn shop. The bell jingled and 3 pairs of eyes turned in my direction. Lloyd and Prudence's reaction was worth all of my misery of the past weeks. Their faces turned pale as quickly as if someone had turned off the inner light in them. Lloyd's eyes widened in horror, and Prudence opened her mouth but couldn't make a sound. "Daddy," Lloyd finally squeezed out. "What are you doing here?" I walked slowly to the counter, looking at my watch, laid out like an item for sale. "Same as you, I guess," I answered calmly. "Interested in watches." Goldstein looked from me to Lloyd and back again, clearly feeling that he was in an awkward situation. "Mr. Whitman," he began uncertainly, "your son told me that this watch is from your collection, and you want to appraise it." "That's true," I nodded, keeping my gaze on Lloyd. "But I thought my son would bring it in for appraisal on Monday. Today I had other plans for that watch." Prudence was the first to come to her senses. "We just wanted to surprise you, Daddy." Her voice trembled, giving away the lie. "To find out how much they're worth so you can insure them properly." "How thoughtful of you," I smiled, but the smile didn't touch my eyes, especially since I'd told Lloyd last week that I'd already taken out new insurance on the entire collection. Lloyd opened his mouth, then closed it, finding no answer. His apple of his eye twitched as he swallowed convulsively. "Yeah, he stammered like a schoolboy caught on a cheat sheet. "Mr. Goldstein," I turned to the pawnbroker. "How much were they offering for this watch?" The old man was clearly uncomfortable, but professional integrity took over. "They weren't offering to sell, Mr. Whitman, just an appraisal. But if they were talking about selling," he hesitated, then sighed, "I'd give about $35,000 for all 3. They're in excellent condition, especially the Patek." $35,000? Less than half their real value. Lloyd and Prudence didn't even know how to bargain. "I can see that," I nodded. "Asha, thank you for your honesty, Solomon." Lloyd stepped toward me, his face taking on a pleading expression. "Dad, can we explain?" "I'm sure we can," I interrupted him. "But before you start making up any more lies, I want to say something." I stood up straight, not as tall as I used to be, but still imposing for my age, and looked straight into my son's eyes. "I changed my will, Lloyd, 2 weeks ago, after I saw the security tapes in my office." Their faces turned even paler, if that was even possible. Prudence gripped the edge of the counter like she was afraid she'd fall. "Cameras," she whispered. Yes, cameras, I nodded. Small, state-of-the-art. They take great video. I saw you taking pictures of my collection, discussing how much it was worth and how quickly you could sell it after I died. Or even sooner if you, what did you call it? Speed up the process? Lloyd took a step back as if I'd hit him. Dad, you don't understand. I understand perfectly well, I cut him off. I understand that you're waiting for me to die like manna from heaven, that you've already mentally spent the money you'll get from selling my things, that you see me as an unfortunate obstacle to wealth. Goldstein coughed delicately and took a step back, giving us some semblance of privacy. But you know what? I continued. You won't get anything. In the new will, you'll only get the house you live in, and that's on the condition that you can't sell it for 10 years. Everything else, including my watch collection, will go to a charity. The effect of my words was even greater than I had expected. Lloyd turned even paler. I didn't think that was possible, and clutched at his heart. Prudence let out a low moan, like a wounded animal. You can't, Lloyd said. We're your family, your blood. Family doesn't steal from each other, I replied quietly. Family doesn't wait for loved ones to die to enrich themselves. Family doesn't plan to speed things up if the old man has become inconvenient. We never, Akram, Prudence began, but I raised my hand, stopping her. I have the notes, Prudence. I've heard every word, and I saw every move you made. I turned to Goldstein, who was trying to blend into the wall so he wouldn't be part of our family drama. Solomon, I'm taking back my watch. Please pack it up. The old man nodded and quickly wrapped the watch in a soft cloth, then stowed it in a wooden box, the same box in which Lloyd had brought it here. Oh, Mr. Whitman, he handed me the box. They're in perfect condition. Your son was very careful with them. Thank you. I took the box and turned to Lloyd and Prudence, who stood as if thunderstruck. I'm going home. I wouldn't advise you to follow me. I need time to decide what to do with you next. Dad, please. Lloyd stepped forward, his voice trembling. We can explain everything. We didn't mean to. Didn't want me to find out, I finished for him. That's the only thing you're really sorry about, that you got caught. I walked toward the exit, holding the watch box tightly in my hands. Already at the door, I turned around one last time. You know what the saddest part is? If you had just asked, I could have given you part of the collection. But you chose to go behind my back like thieves, and now you're getting nothing. I went outside where Eugene was waiting for me. He silently took the watch box from me and helped me to the car. Only as we drove away from the pawn shop did he speak. Are you all right, Humphrey? I looked out the window at the passing city, at the people going about their business, unaware of the little family tragedy that had just played out in Goldstein's pawn shop. No, I answered honestly, but I will. Now that it's all out in the open, I feel strangely relieved. It's like I've been carrying a heavy load for a long time, and I've finally shed it. What are you going to do next? Eugene asked, turning carefully onto our street. I looked at the clock box that stood on the seat between us, my treasures that I had collected with so much love, which now caused my son's true face to be revealed. For starters, I said, stroking the lid of the box, I will indeed change the will. Everything I told them at the pawn shop will become true. Eugene gave me a quick glance that was a mixture of surprise and respect. You were bluffing? Back at the pawn shop? Of course, I allowed myself a weak smile. I hadn't changed my will yet, but I will now. We pulled up to my house. It looked the same as always. White walls, blue shutters, a neat lawn. But it was different for me. The house no longer seemed like a refuge from the world, a place where memories of happy times lived. It was now a fortress that had to be to defend against my own family. Thank you, Eugene. I shook my old friend's hand. I'll call you tomorrow. Be careful, Humphrey, he nodded toward the Lloyd house across the street. Shit termite. They might come back, and they'll be angry. I know, I replied, but I'm ready. I still have a few trumps up my sleeve. I got out of the car holding the clock box tightly. The sun was slipping toward sunset, coloring the sky orange and pink. A beautiful evening. Too beautiful for such an ugly day. But in a strange way, I felt stronger than I ever had in years. Lloyd and Prudence's betrayal had broken my heart, but it had also awakened in me a resolve I'd thought long lost. Now I knew what I had to do. I went into the house, locked the door, and put the box with the clock on the table. Then I went to the telephone and dialed the number of my lawyer. It was time to get my affairs in order. For real. The morning after the pawn shop incident, I was awakened by the doorbell. Insistent, nervous, as if the person on the doorstep was afraid I might not answer. I already knew who it was before I even looked out the window. Lloyd and Prudence were standing on the porch with an expression of genuine remorse on their faces. So convincing that any outsider would have been moved. Lloyd held a bouquet, my favorite white lilies that Evelyn always put in the living room. Prudence was clutching a basket of homemade pastries, the smell of which wafted through the closed door. I didn't hurry to open it. I watched them through the thin slit in the curtain, noting the way Lloyd shifted nervously from foot to foot, the way Prudence kept fixing her hair, a gesture that betrayed her extreme anxiety. They didn't know I could see them. They didn't know that now that they thought they were out of my sight, their pretense was especially obvious. Finally, deciding that they had suffered enough in obscurity, I opened the door. I did it slowly, deliberately creating tension. "Good morning," I said dryly, not inviting them in. "Dad," Lloyd began with a pained grimace, as if he was struggling with every word. "We came to apologize. What happened yesterday? It was a terrible misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated, putting all my disbelief into the word. "Yes," Prudence said, handing me the basket. "We never intended to sell your watch, I swear. We just wanted to find out what it was worth so we could surprise you for your birthday." My eyebrow went up involuntarily. Birthday surprise. In May. Which is still 3 months away. Prudence hesitated but quickly found herself. "We planned ahead. We wanted to ensure the collection for full value as a gift. We know how important they are to you." I looked at them, and I saw through them. I saw the falseness in every gesture, every intonation. I saw the way Lloyd could barely contain his irritation. I saw Prudence avoiding a direct gaze, staring over my shoulder. "Is that why you were sneaking pictures of the watch? Is that why you were discussing when I'd go to hell and how much you could get for it?" My hand gripped the doorknob tighter. "Is that why you took away the 3 most expensive pairs when you thought I was at a doctor's appointment?" "Dad," Lloyd's voice trembled, "we made a mistake, a terrible mistake. We shouldn't have—" "I'm old, Lloyd, but I'm not stupid," I interrupted him. "And I have an excellent memory, unlike what you think of me. I remember every word you said on that tape." They exchanged quick looks of panic. "The tape?" Lloyd interjected, though I'd already mentioned them yesterday. "Yes, the tapes from the cameras in my office. The ones I installed when I started noticing that someone was touching my things." Prudence let out a quiet gasp, her face as white as chalk. "You taped us? I mean, that's an invasion of privacy." "My privacy, in my own home," I clarified, feeling a cold rage rising inside me. "And the notes were very informative, especially the part where you discussed the possibility of declaring me incompetent if I become inconvenient." Lloyd took a step forward, his face contorted with a mixture of fear and anger. "Dad, I swear we would never do anything like that. You misunderstood us." "Did I?" I crossed my arms across my chest. "Then explain to me exactly what I misunderstood about speed up the process and declare him incompetent." They froze like rabbits in front of a snake. Their eyes were filled with fear of exposure, which was quickly replaced by frantic attempts to find a way out of the situation. "Look, Dad," Lloyd said in an almost pleading tone, "we've really said some terrible things, unforgivable things, but it was just a momentary lapse of judgment. Prudence and I, we were having financial problems, serious problems. We panicked." "Oh, that's it. Now we're getting to the real explanation," I thought. I wondered why they didn't start with that one right away. "What kind of problems?" I asked, even though I was pretty sure I knew the answer. Lloyd lowered his gaze, feigning shame. "Yeah, I took out a business loan. I wanted to start my own company, but it all went wrong. We owed the bank a large sum, and if we don't pay it off by the end of the year, we'll lose the house." Prudence nodded, confirming his every word, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Good actress, always knew that. "And that's why you decided to sell my watch?" I clarified. "We weren't going to sell it," Prudence exclaimed. "Shurshin, we just wanted to know how much it was worth. Just in case." "In case?" In case I died, I finished for her, to know if the money from their sale would be enough to pay off your debt. They didn't deny it. They just stood there with their heads down, like misbehaving children. Only these children were grown men who had coldly and calculatingly planned to steal from their father. Come in, I stepped back from the door, unexpectedly. This is going to be a long conversation, and we don't want to expose our family affairs to the neighbors. They looked at each other in surprise, but quickly accepted the invitation, fearing I might change my mind. I led them into the living room, sat them down on the couch, and offered them tea. They declined, clearly nervous at this sudden change in my mood. So, I said, sitting down in my chair across from them, how much do you owe? Lloyd named a sum, an impressive sum, I must admit, enough to justify their desperate measures, assuming, of course, it was true and not another lie. What are you going to do with that debt? I asked. We're trying to find a way out, Lloyd answered, hope in his voice. I'm looking for a second job. Prudence is thinking of going back to sales, but time is short and interest is rising. I nodded, listening to their plans, which sounded pathetic even to themselves. It was all a screen. They hoped I would soften up, offer to help, and then they wouldn't have to answer for the attempted theft. I'll think about what I can do about your situation, I said finally. But first I need time. What you've done. It's not something you can just forget. Ah. Of course, Dad, Lloyd nodded hastily. We understand. We just wanted you to know how sorry we are. Very sorry, Prudence echoed, pressing her hand to her heart in a theatrical gesture. Okay, I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. I'll contact you when I'm ready to continue this conversation. They left, thanking me for my understanding, promising to make it up to me, swearing their love and devotion. I stood on the porch staring at them, thinking about how cynical they must be to go on with their play after all that had happened. When their silhouettes disappeared behind the door of their house across the street, I went back into the living room and pulled out my phone. It was time to put my plan into action. The first call I made was to the bank. It turned out that Lloyd had indeed taken out a loan, but not for business development, but to buy his new SUV and a vacation in Hawaii that he had forgotten to mention. The amount owed was also a third less than what he said. Typical. Even in their confession, they couldn't be completely honest. The second call was to Cecil Brown, my old friend and former attorney, who had once helped me with the probate after Evelyn's death. Humphrey, what a surprise. His deep voice sounded as cheerful as it had 30 years ago. What can I do for you? I need counseling, Cecil, private and confidential. Sounds intriguing, he grinned. Come by the office tomorrow, say 11 o'clock? Sorno? I'd rather meet you somewhere neutral. Jerry's Cafe at noon. I don't want my visit to the lawyer to attract attention. Cecil hesitated a second, but didn't ask any questions. Okay, noon at Jerry's. I'll be waiting. I spent the rest of the day preparing for the meeting. I went over the deeds to the house I'd once given to Lloyd and Prudence, reviewed my current will, estimated the value of my watch collection at the latest auction prices. The numbers were adding up to an interesting picture. That evening, as I expected, Lloyd showed up, alone, without Prudence. Brought me dinner in plastic containers, supposedly homemade, but I recognized the cooking style from the restaurant on the corner. Shawana. Prudence wanted to come herself, but she has a migraine, he explained, unpacking the food on the kitchen table. She's really stressed out about all this. Of course, I nodded, not giving away my skepticism. Tell her I understand. Lloyd moved about the kitchen with a feigned casualness, trying to create an air of normalcy, as if last night's incident had never happened, like he hadn't been caught red-handed trying to sell my collection. How was your day, Dad? He asked, warming up the soup. What did you do? Nothing much, I shrugged. Days are pretty monotonous at my age. Don't say that, he frowned with feigned concern. You're still full of energy. Full enough to notice when my stuff goes missing from the house. I couldn't help but quip. Lloyd flinched, but quickly pulled himself together. Dad, I know Prudence and I made a terrible mistake, but I swear we will never again. Let's not talk about this at dinner, I interrupted him. Let's just eat in peace. He agreed with relief, and we spent the next hour talking awkwardly about the weather, the news, and the neighbors. Lloyd tried to be a pleasant conversationalist, listening intently to my occasional comments, laughing at my not-so-funny jokes. the perfect son. When dinner was over, he lingered, as if he wanted to say something else but didn't dare. "Spit it out, Lloyd," I said finally. "Anything else on your mind?" He hesitated, then said, "Dad, about your new will. Did you really sign it over to charity?" There it was. The real reason for his visit. "Why does it matter?" I asked, watching his reaction carefully. "Shouldn't your first concern be for my welfare, not what happens after I die?" "Of course I do, I mean." "No, of course your well-being comes first." He was confused by his own words. "It's just, you said that yesterday at the pawn shop, and I thought, maybe you said it in the heat of the moment." I didn't answer right away, so I let him get a little more nervous. "You know, Lloyd," I said finally, "we all say and do things in haste. The question is, do we regret it? Sincerely repent." His face brightened. "That's right, Dad. Prudence and I are truly sorry. It was a moment's weakness, a terrible mistake we will never make again." "I believe you think so," I nodded. "As for the will, I haven't made a final decision yet. I need time." That was a lie. I had already made up my mind, but Lloyd didn't need to know that. "Sure, Dad," he smiled with visible relief. "As much time as you need. We're in no hurry." No hurry, I thought. No rush. After he left, I sat in silence for a long time, thinking about what had happened in those 2 days, about the betrayal, the revelation, the fake remorse, about how easily people deceive themselves into thinking their lies aren't visible to others. I pulled out a picture of Evelyn, the one of her standing by the lake, the wind ruffling her hair, and that special smile on her face that was meant only for me. "What would you do, Evie?" I asked the photograph. "You've always been wiser than me about these things." There was no answer, of course, but I knew my Evelyn. She was kind, but not weak, fair, but not cruel. She wouldn't let our son escape the consequences of his actions, but she also wouldn't punish him just out of revenge. My plan began to take shape. The next day at noon sharp, I sat in Jerry's cafe, sipping a strong black coffee and waiting for Cecil to show up. The cafe was far enough away from our neighborhood that I wouldn't run into any neighbors, but close enough to get there without any problems. Cecil showed up right on time, impeccably dressed as always and carrying his invariable leather briefcase. Though he was in his 80s, he moved with the energy of a man half his age. "Humphrey," he shook my hand firmly, "you look more alert than the last time I saw you." "Anger makes you strong," I grinned. He ordered a coffee and sat down across from me. "So what's your confidential business?" I told him everything. How I'd noticed the missing items, how I'd set up the cameras, how I'd caught Lloyd and Prudence at the pawn shop, about their false apologies and their attempts to manipulate me after the expose. Cecil listened without interrupting, only occasionally making notes in a small notebook. When I finished, he sighed heavily. "It's a sad story, Humphrey, but unfortunately, not an uncommon one. I see too often how inheritance destroys families." "It's not about inheritance, Cecil," I countered. "It's about trust. They weren't just waiting for me to die. They were actively preparing for it. Maybe even planning to speed up the process, as they called it." "That's a serious accusation," Cecil frowned. "Uh-huh. Do you have proof of their intentions?" "Cell footage of them discussing the possibility of declaring me incapacitated if I become inconvenient." "That's close enough to a threat, don't you think?" Cecil nodded. "Enough to cause concern, but not enough for legal action, unless they've taken concrete steps in that direction." "I'm not going to sue them," I shook my head. "It would make me look like a laughingstock in front of the whole town. An old man suing his own son over an inheritance. No, I have a different plan." I outlined my ideas to him. Cecil listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions or suggesting alternatives. His legal experience was invaluable for finalizing details. "It'll work," he said at last. "But are you sure you want to go this way? It's a pretty radical solution." "Weren't their actions radical?" I shrugged. "They chose this game, Cecil. I'm just changing the rules." Cecil tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. "You know, Humphrey, in my practice, I've often faced family conflicts. They almost always end up with both parties dissatisfied, even if one of them legally wins. Sonner, I'm not looking for victory," I replied quietly. I'm looking for justice, and maybe a little satisfaction that they'll get what they deserve. Cecil nodded, acknowledging that I was right. In that case, I'll help you. But give yourself some more time to think about it. Make sure it's really what you want. We spent another hour discussing details and possible legal obstacles. When we finished, Cecil promised to have all the necessary documents ready by the end of the week. I'll send them to you by courier, he said. No electronic copies, no trace. Thank you, Cecil. I shook his hand firmly. You're a true friend. Just be careful, Humphrey, he said with a serious look in his eyes. Cornered people can be unpredictable. I nodded, accepting his warning. He was right, of course. Lloyd and Prudence wouldn't be happy when they found out about my plan, but I was ready for their reaction, ready for the next move in this chess game. On the way home, I thought about what Evelyn would say about my decision. Would she have approved of my actions, or would she have advised me to forgive and forget? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it didn't matter. I had to do what I thought was right for myself. After all, in the end, it was me who had to live with the consequences. At home, there was another surprise waiting for me. There was an envelope on my doorstep. Inside was an apology card from Prudence, written in her neat handwriting, with lots of exclamation points and underlines to convince me of her sincerity. I grinned, setting the card aside. Their game was getting more and more desperate. Well, let them play. They'd soon find out that the game had changed, and they won't like the new rules at all. 2 days after my meeting with Cecil, a courier delivered a heavy envelope of documents. I spent the whole evening studying every clause, every legal wording, until I was sure that everything was exactly as we had agreed. Cecil, as always, had done an impeccable job. The next morning I called Jenkins, the owner of an antique store in a neighboring town. We'd known each other for years, not close friends, but people who respected each other's hobbies. I bought parts from him to restore clocks, and he occasionally consulted with me on movements. Humphrey, what a surprise, he said with genuine pleasure. To what do I owe the honor? Shamar, I have a delicate proposition to make to you, Jenkins, I said. It concerns my watch collection. Are you trying to sell something? He sounded surprised. He knew how much I valued my collection. Not exactly sell, more like moving it into safe hands. Temporarily, I paused. It's a long story, and I'd rather discuss it in person. We agreed to meet at his store in 2 days. That was enough time for me to prepare the first batch of watches for transfer. That evening, Lloyd showed up. Alone, without Prudence, she, he said, was busy preparing for a charity dinner. The irony did not escape me. Charity, which she had never mentioned before, had suddenly become her passion. I wondered if it had something to do with my announcement at the pawn shop that I was going to sign everything over to a charity. How are you, Dad? Lloyd asked, settling into the chair across from mine. He glanced around the living room, and his gaze lingered for a moment on the empty display case where the 3 pairs of watches I'd found at the pawn shop used to stand. Not bad, I replied, watching his reaction. For my age. Lloyd smiled uncertainly, clearly unsure how to respond to my mention of age, a topic he himself had used against me so often. I noticed some of the clocks were out of place, he said casually. Did you move them? No, I shook my head. I sold them. Lloyd froze. A mixture of shock and dismay flashed across his face, which he immediately tried to hide. Sold them? He asked with feigned surprise. But you treasured your collection so much. I did, I agreed. But after what happened, I realized I couldn't be sure it was safe in this house. Lloyd swallowed, his apple of his eye twitching nervously. Dad, if this is about that incident, Prudence and I have already apologized. 1,000 times apologized. It was a terrible mistake that will never happen again. I believe that, I lied. But the decision has already been made. I sold those 3 pairs of watches to a collector in Boston. Got a good price. And what do you plan to do with the money? Lloyd asked cautiously. That was it, the real cause of his anxiety. I haven't decided yet, I shrugged. Maybe I'll take a trip. I've always wanted to see the Grand Canyon. At your age, Lloyd blurted out, and he bit his lip, realizing his mistake. Sonam, what's wrong with my age? I asked with deliberate bewilderment. I'm quite healthy, if that's what you're worried about. Of course you are, he agreed hastily. It's just that traveling long distances can be tiring. But if you want to, it's a wonderful idea. Maybe Prudence and I could go with you. Help with the organization? I smiled, imagining them both going crazy with worry, seeing the money from the watches they'd sold drain away on traveling instead of saving up for their future inheritance. I'll think about it, I said. In the meantime, I have an appointment with Cecil Brown to change the will. Lloyd tensed even more, if that was even possible. With a lawyer? So soon? Are you sure you're not rushing into a decision? At my age, I deliberately used his favorite expression, you can't put these things off. Who knows how long I have left? Don't say that, Lloyd leaned forward with an expression of feigned concern. You're going to live a lot of years, and there's no need to rush into changing your will. Decisions like this are best made fresh in your mind when your emotions have calmed down. My emotions are fine, Lloyd. I looked him straight in the eye. And my mind, too. I know exactly what I'm doing. After Lloyd left, I called Eugene and told him about our conversation. My old friend chuckled. He'll be watching you now, Eugene said, and your visits to Cecil. That's what I'm counting on, I said. Let him think he knows all my plans. The next day, I did visit Cecil's office, knowing full well that Lloyd would somehow find out about it. Cecil and I spent an hour discussing the details of my new will, which was really only part of the plan. The real documents changing the ownership of my assets had already been signed and were lying in a safe place. When I got home, Prudence was already waiting there with a basket of fruit and fresh baked goods. I thought you'd like it, she said, setting the treats on the kitchen table. You look tired. Busy day? Business, I answered evasively. Meetings, papers, boring stuff. Lloyd mentioned you were at the lawyer's. She tried to sound casual, but I could hear the tension in her voice. Was it something serious? Just updating my will. I watched her reaction. After recent events, I decided it was time to make some changes. Prudence froze for a moment, then continued to arrange the fruit with feigned nonchalance. Of course, that's your right, she said without looking at me. But I hope you're not making any hasty decisions because of that silly misunderstanding. Misunderstanding, I repeated. An interesting word for trying to sell someone else's property. Prudence finally looked up at me, her eyes a mixture of irritation and fear. She went, Humphrey, we've already explained. We had no intention of selling the watch. It was a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness. Can't you forgive your only son for one mistake? One, I raised an eyebrow. What about all the things that went missing from my house before that? The cufflinks, the flask, the coins. She looked away, clearly not ready for a direct accusation. I don't know anything about that, she mumbled. Nakanum, maybe you just forget? I finished for her. Lost it? Or maybe I'm getting senile dementia, and I just don't remember where I put them. Prudence didn't answer, and that in itself was an answer. Anyway, I continued, what's done is done. Now I'm just taking steps to protect what's left. What do you mean? There was alarm in her voice. I'm selling off my collection, Prudence, I said bluntly. Some of it has already been sold, and the rest will be sold in the coming weeks. The whole collection? Her voice trembled. But why? It's your passion, your hobby. It was, I corrected her. Now it's my passion to make sure my possessions are used the way I want them, not the way others want them. Prudence licked her lips nervously. And where will the money from the sale go? That's my business, I said. But you can be sure it will be used wisely. She left shortly afterward, clearly upset and confused. I could imagine the conversation that would take place between her and Lloyd tonight. 2 days later, I took the first batch of watches to Jenkins. 10 pairs, including several particularly valuable pieces. We signed an agreement whereby he would keep them in a special safe, inaccessible to the store's visitors. They'll be perfectly safe, Jenkins assured me, as he carefully placed the last watch in the safe. And no one will know they're here. I appreciate your help, I said, shaking his hand, and your understanding. You're welcome, he smiled. After everything you've told me, I'd do the same thing if I were you. On the way home, I stopped by my banker, Horace Miller, whom we'd worked with since I'd bought my first house. Horace was as old as I was, but his mind was still sharp and his knowledge of finance impeccable. It's all set, Humphrey, he said, handing me a folder of papers. A new account has been set up in the trust's name. Neither Lloyd nor his wife will be able to access it, even if, he hesitated. Even if I'm declared incompetent, I finished for him. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Horace shook his head. I never thought I'd have to protect a man from his own children. The world is becoming a strange place. Not the world, Horace, I countered. Just some of the people in it. When I got home, Lloyd's car was in the driveway. He was sitting on the porch, tapping his foot nervously on the wooden boards. Where have you been? He asked, coming up to meet me. He sounded annoyed, which he immediately tried to hide. I was worried. On business, I answered, walking past him to the door. What is it? Prudence said you were selling off your collection. He followed me into the house. Is that true? Yes. I hung up my coat and walked into the living room. Oh, already sold almost half of it. Lloyd stepped ahead of me and stood where he could see my face. But why? That's crazy. You've been collecting it for 20 years. And now I'm selling it, I shrugged. It's my decision, Lloyd. But what happens to the money? He didn't hide his concern anymore. Where will it go? I've already put it in a special account, I replied. For the charity fund, just like I told you at the pawn shop. Lloyd turned pale. Are you serious? You're just give away everything? Your inheritance? Your savings to some charity? Not some charity, I corrected him. I chose the foundation very carefully. They do good work. That was a lie. No foundation existed. The money had been transferred to a trust controlled by Cecil with explicit instructions on how it was to be used. But Lloyd didn't need to know that. Dad, Lloyd changed tactics, his voice almost pleading. I know you're still mad at us. You have every right to be. But this is too drastic. Think about your future, your comfort. I am thinking about my future, I said firmly. And justice. Lloyd clenched his fists, then slowly unclenched them, clearly trying to control his emotions. Fairness, he repeated bitterly. Shaburhawk, you call this justice? To disinherit your only son because of one mistake? One mistake? I grinned. Lloyd, you and Prudence have been systematically stealing from me, talking about my death as if it were a long-awaited event. Planned to declare me incapacitated if I became inconvenient. And it's all on record, remember? Lloyd opened his mouth, then closed it, finding no answer. His face contorted with a mixture of anger and despair. I'm your son, he finally said. Your blood. Doesn't that mean anything? It does, I nodded. That's why I didn't go to the police when I caught you at the pawn shop. It's why I'm giving you a chance to fix your life without my money. Lloyd left, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. I had no doubt that he and Prudence would have a very heated discussion about their future today. The following week, I continued my plan. I took the second shipment of watches to Jenkins, transferred some more money to the trust account, and met with a real estate appraiser to find out the current value of my house. All the while, I felt like I was being watched. Sometimes it was Lloyd, sometimes it was Prudence, sometimes it was someone I didn't know, perhaps a private investigator hired by them. It didn't bother me. Let them see me acting decisively. Let them be nervous. It was part of the plan. Wednesday night, I got a call from Cecil. Humphrey, there's something you need to know, he said without preamble. Your son was at Dr. Peterson's this morning. I tensed up. Dr. Peterson had been my therapist for years. How do you know that? I have my sources, Cecil answered evasively. The important thing is that they discussed your mental health. Lloyd expressed concern about your irrational behavior and sudden financial decisions. So they've really decided to go down this road. They're trying to declare me incompetent, just like they threatened on that tape. Thanks for the information, I said. But I'm ready for it. We saw this coming. Be careful, Humphrey, Cecil sounded genuinely concerned. Shop it. Things like this can get very messy very quickly. I know, I replied. But I have the advantage of being sane, and I have proof of their real intentions. The next morning I visited Dr. Peterson. Not waiting for him to talk about my mental health, I brought it up myself. Doctor, I know my son has come to you with concerns about my condition, I said bluntly. And I realize your confidentiality prevents you from discussing this with me. But I want you to know the full picture. I told him everything. About the missing items, about the hidden cameras, about how I'd caught Lloyd and Prudence at the pawn shop. I showed him copies of the videos on my phone. Dr. Peterson listened with increasing amazement, and when I finished, shook his head. Mr. Whitman, thank you for your candor. I can't comment on your son's visit, but I can say that I don't see any signs of cognitive impairment in your behavior. On the contrary, your actions seem to me quite rational under the circumstances. Would you mind recording this officially? I asked, in case I need to. Of course, he nodded. I'll do a full examination today and issue a report on your mental health. I left the doctor's office with a sense of relief. One more detail of the plan fell into place. At home, I was in for an unpleasant surprise. Lloyd and Prudence were sitting in the living room with a strange man in a strict suit. Dad, Lloyd came up to meet me. This is Dr. Harrison, a specialist in gerontology. Prudence and I are very concerned about you and have asked for his consultation. I knew immediately what was going on. Dr. Peterson didn't live up to their expectations, so they found another doctor, one who might be more inclined to agree with their version of events. Pleased to meet you, doctor. I shook his hand, remaining calm, although I would have preferred to have been informed of your visit in advance. Sorry for the inconvenience, Mr. Whitman. Dr. Harrison smiled a professional smile. Downer, your son is very concerned about your condition and has asked me to speak with you. My condition, I repeated. And what is he so concerned about? Dr. Harrison cast a quick glance at Lloyd, then looked at me again. He mentioned some unusual financial decisions you've made recently. The sale of valuable collectibles, about the sudden change in your will. And that's right, I nodded. I'm selling my watch collection and changing my will. You see, Mr. Whitman, sometimes at your age, people can make decisions that they don't fully realize. Dr. Harrison, I interrupted him, I am fully aware of my decisions, and I have good reasons for them. I turned to Lloyd. Reasons of which my son is well aware. Lloyd turned pale but quickly pulled himself together. Dad, we just want to make sure you're okay. Your behavior lately, it's been bothering us. I just came from Dr. Peterson, I said, watching their faces stretch. He did a full workup and found no problems with my mental health. I can show you the report if you'd like. Dr. Harrison looked embarrassed. Lloyd looked angry. Prudence looked frightened. I appreciate your concern, doctor, I continued. But as you can see, it's not necessary. I'm perfectly fine. I'm in complete control of my actions. Dr. Harrison stood up awkwardly. In that case, I'm sorry to bother you, Mr. Whitman. I was just doing my job. Of course, I nodded. Lloyd, show the doctor out, and then you and Prudence and I will have a talk. When the doctor left, I turned to see them both. They were sitting on the couch like delinquent children waiting to be punished. This is low, even for you, I said quietly, trying to declare me incompetent so you can get control of my money. We're just worried about you, Prudence whispered, but there was a realization in her eyes that the game was up. No, I shook my head. You're worried about you, about not getting my money. But you know what? Even if you could get me declared incompetent, it wouldn't help. All my assets are already in a trust that you can't control. Lloyd jumped up, his face contorted with rage. You can't do this to us. We're your family, the only family you have left. Family doesn't try to declare each other crazy over money, Lloyd, I replied calmly. And if that's all you can offer me as a family, then maybe I'm better off alone. They left shortly afterward, humiliated and angry. I knew this wasn't over, that they could think of new ways to get what they thought was rightfully theirs. But I was ready. I had anticipated their moves and prepared for each one. That evening I sat in my office, looking at the half-empty display cases where my precious watch used to stand. I felt no regret. The watch was safe with Jenkins, and the money from the sale of the others was in the trust account. Everything was going according to plan. Tomorrow I was to meet with Cecil for the final step, the transfer of the deeds to Lloyd and Prudence's house, the house I had once given them out of love, and now I was going to use as an instrument of justice. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, a good whiskey I kept for special occasions, and raised it in a silent toast to Evelyn. She wouldn't approve of all this, but she would understand. She always understood me better than anyone else. To justice, Evie, I whispered into the void, and to everyone getting what they deserve. The morning was overcast. I stood at my bedroom window, watching the gray clouds slowly creep across the sky, heralding rain. The weather matched my mood, not gloomy, but determined. Today was the day when all the cards would be laid on the table. I had already called Lloyd and then asked him to come over with Prudence at noon. Important conversation, I said. He didn't argue or ask questions, probably hoping I'd changed my mind and was willing to make peace, or more likely, was preparing a new strategy for getting my property. But tonight, all their plans would fall apart for good. At 11, Cecil arrived with the last of the papers. We sat at the kitchen table going over the papers, making sure every clause was legally flawless. "Are you sure you want to go all the way?" Cecil asked, watching me over his glasses. "These are tough measures, Humphrey, especially for your only son, who tried to steal from me and incapacitate me," I reminded him. "Yes, I'm sure. There's no point in half measures." Cecil nodded and pulled out another envelope. "Then here's a copy of an independent medical report confirming your full legal capacity, notarized and legally binding, in case they decide to challenge your actions in court. Sure, they'll try, I was sure of it." "But they won't." "Don't be so sure," Cecil frowned. "Litigation can drag on for years, especially when there's an inheritance involved." "Well," I shrugged, "I've got plenty of time." Cecil grinned. "I don't doubt that. You're a tough nut to crack, Humphrey Whitman." When he left, I arranged the papers on the living room table in a certain order, so that the right papers would be at hand when I needed them. Then I made coffee and liquid cookies, which Prudence hated because they were crumbly. It was a small thing, but I found a kind of satisfaction in it. At precisely noon, the doorbell rang. Lloyd and Prudence stood on the doorstep, both in smart suits, as if they were there for a business meeting, which in fact was true. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They walked into the living room, looking around warily, as if they were expecting to see someone else here. When they noticed the papers on the table, they exchanged quick glances. "Have a seat," I pointed to the couch. "Coffee?" "No thanks," Lloyd answered for both of them. "Did you want to talk about something important?" "Yes." I sat down across from them, feeling strangely calm. "I want to tell you about my final decision regarding the inheritance." Prudence tensed, her fingers frantically clutching her purse. "Papa, if this is about that incident at the pawn shop," Lloyd began. "Let me finish," I interrupted him. "What I'm about to say isn't just about the pawn shop. It's about everything. The missing items, your talk of my death, your attempt to have me declared incompetent. Everything." They fell silent, apparently deciding it was better to hear me out before trying to defend themselves. "As you know, I've started selling off my watch collection," I continued. "What you don't know is that I've sold all of it. All 63 pairs, at market value, and some of them even more expensive." "All of it?" Prudence asked, not hiding her horror. "But why?" "Because I couldn't be sure you wouldn't try to steal them again," I answered bluntly. "Or more likely, to take them right after I died and sell them for nothing, without realizing their true value." Lloyd opened his mouth to object, but I held up my hand to stop him. "The money from the sale of the watch has already been put into a special trust, but not a charitable trust, as I said before." I saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. "It's a private trust with very specific terms for distributing the funds." I took the first document from the table and handed it to Lloyd. "Read aloud, please, the highlighted paragraph." Lloyd reluctantly took the paper and began to read. "The proceeds from the sale of the Humphrey James Whitman watch collection shall be distributed as follows. A monthly annuity of $1,000 shall be paid to Humphrey J. Whitman for life. Upon his death, the balance shall be held in the Evelyn May Whitman Trust for the purpose of funding scholarships for engineering students." Lloyd raised a perplexed look at me. "Scholarships? You're giving all the money to scholarships?" "Yes," I nodded, "in memory of your mother, who always saw education as an asset, and so that the money would do real good, not be spent on luxury cars and vacations in Hawaii." Prudence shuddered. I'd hit the target. "But it's not fair," Lloyd exclaimed. "It's our inheritance." "Oh, which you tried to get by stealing from me while I was alive," I replied calmly. "No, Lloyd, it is not your inheritance. It is my property, and I dispose of it as I see fit." "And the house?" Prudence asked, licking her lips nervously. "You said we would keep the house." "Oh yes, the house." I picked up another folder from the table. "There are two, as you know. This house, where I live now, and the one you live in, the house I gave you for your wedding 25 years ago." I pulled a document out of the folder and held it out to Lloyd. "What's this?" he asked, not touching the paper. "The certificate of title to your house," I answered. "Or rather, the house that was yours until yesterday." There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" Prudence's voice trembled. "You see, when I gave you that house, there was an interesting clause in the deed of gift." I smiled without a shadow of amusement. "A clause you obviously didn't bother to read carefully. According to it, I have the right to revoke the gift under certain circumstances. For example, if someone tries to harm me." "That's impossible," Lloyd whispered. "You can't just take the house you gave me 25 years ago." "Anawa, I can," I pointed to the deed. "And I did. Yesterday, the court invalidated the deed of gift based on the evidence presented, including videotapes of you discussing the possibility of declaring me incapacitated in order to gain control of my property. That qualifies as an attempt to harm Lloyd." They sat stunned, unable to believe what was happening. I continued, "As of today, the house belongs to me, but I have no intention of evicting you immediately." I paused, watching the flicker of relief on their faces. "Instead, I suggest you rent it." "Rent it?" Lloyd interjected. "Our own house?" "My house," I corrected. "At the market rent for the neighborhood." "Which is—" I pretended to think about it, though I knew the exact amount, about $3,000 a month. Prudence made a squeezing sound like a sob. We can't afford that amount," she whispered. "Oh, I know," I nodded. "With your debts and Lloyd's new car, it won't be easy. But maybe you should look for a job, Prudence. Or sell the SUV and buy something more economical, Lloyd." Their faces contorted with a mixture of shock, anger, and fear. I continued, giving them no time to recover. "As for this house," I circled the living room, "I kept it, but when I die, you will not have it. I bequeathed it to the city for a small museum of watchmaking." "A museum?" Lloyd asked, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Yes," I nodded. "Jenkins's idea, actually. He agreed to be a consultant and help organize the exhibit. And the few pieces in my collection that I haven't sold will be the centerpiece of the exhibit." "You didn't sell your entire collection?" Lloyd sounded incredulous. "Of course not," I grinned. "I kept the pieces that were most precious to me, the ones with special memories. But they're safely hidden, and you'll never know where." There was a long pause. Lloyd and Prudence sat, digesting the information, obviously trying to find a way out of the situation. "This is cruel, Dad," Lloyd finally said. "You're punishing us for one mistake by taking away everything." "One?" I raised an eyebrow. "Lloyd, you've been systematically stealing from me, planned to sell my collection behind my back, discussed ways to speed up the process, and have me declared incompetent. It's not just one mistake, it's a way of life." "Sure or no." "We're sorry," Prudence whispered, tears glistening in her eyes. "Really, we do." "For what?" I asked bluntly. "For what they did, or for getting caught?" They didn't answer, and that in itself was an answer. "Look, Dad," Lloyd went on the offensive, "you can't just take everything away from us. We're your family. We're your blood. What are people going to say when they find out you threw your own son out on the street?" "I'm not kicking anyone out," I countered. "I'm offering you a market price lease. And as for public opinion," I shrugged, "what will people say when they find out you tried to sell my stuff behind my back and declare me incompetent to take possession of my property?" "You wouldn't dare," Prudence breathed out. "You wouldn't make a fool of your own son." "I wouldn't?" I leaned forward. "Prudence, I've given copies of all the records to Cecil, Eugene, and 3 other trusted people, with instructions to release them to the public if anything happens to me under suspicious circumstances, or if you try to challenge my decisions in court. So yes, I dare you." Lloyd jumped up, his face contorted with rage. "You can't do this to us. We'll fight this. We'll get the best lawyers." "Sornin, sure, you can try," I nodded calmly. "But keep in mind that all my decisions are legally impeccable. Cecil made sure of that. And your attempts to challenge them will only result in the records becoming public knowledge." Lloyd sank back onto the couch as if he'd been drained of all air. Prudence sat with her hands over her face. "One more thing," I added, pulling out the last document. "This is the official notice that the rent for the house is going up on the 1st of next month. The new amount is $3,500, with an annual increase of 5%. You can't raise the rent you just set, Lloyd exclaimed. I can, I smiled without a shadow of mirth. Check the state law. If you give the tenants 30 days notice, the owner has the right to raise the rent. And you got the notice today, just in time. This is crazy, Prudence whispered. You're ruining us out of revenge. No, Prudence, I shook my head. I'm giving you a chance to live on your own without relying on other people's money. Money you haven't earned or deserved. Lloyd stood up suddenly, and there was a strange gleam in his eyes. All right, he said, suddenly calm. You won, Dad. You punished us. You've shown your power. Now let's talk like adults. There has to be a compromise. I knew that tactic. When Lloyd was a kid and he got caught doing something naughty, he'd deny it. Then he'd get angry. Then he'd try to negotiate. He was doing the same thing now. Compromise? I raised an eyebrow. What kind of compromise are you suggesting? Well, for one, he tried to sound reasonable, you could keep the rent at a reasonable level. Say $1,000, and we could help you with the house. Come over every day, cook, clean. Like now? I specified. Bringing food I didn't ask for and pretending to worry about my health while you're actually waiting for me to die? Lloyd hesitated, then continued. No, really helping. You're getting old, Dad. You're going to need care. We could, I've hired a nurse, I interrupted him. Mrs. Courtney will come 3 times a week, and I have Eugene and other friends who visit me. Real friends I can trust. Dad, please, Lloyd's voice became pleading. We're your family, the only family. No, Lloyd, I shook my head. Family doesn't steal from each other. A family doesn't talk about how to get rid of an old man's father so they can get his money. A family doesn't try to declare a family man crazy over an inheritance. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. You have 30 days to decide whether you stay in the house under the new terms or look for another place to live. And I suggest you start looking for a job, Prudence. With your experience in sales, I don't think it won't be difficult. They left a few minutes later, broken and lost. Lloyd didn't say a word goodbye, only threw me a look full of a mixture of rage and despair. Prudence sobbed, wiping her eyes with the lace handkerchief I had once given Evelyn. When the door closed behind them, I stood for a long time in the empty living room, listening to the silence of the house. A strange feeling came over me, not triumph, not the satisfaction of revenge, but rather a weary acceptance of the inevitable. It was as if the long, agonizing operation had finally ended, and now the period of recovery was beginning. I went to the window and saw them getting into the car. Lloyd was saying something fervently to Prudence, waving his arms. She nodded, wiping away her tears. Then they drove away, and the street was empty. I wonder what they'll do next. Try to find a legal loophole? Raise money for a lawyer? Or maybe they'll finally start living an honest life without relying on other people's money? I hoped for the latter, but I didn't have much faith in it. People rarely change, especially if they've been used to taking the path of least resistance for years. That evening, I called Jenkins and told him the plan had been put into motion. How did they react? He asked with genuine interest. Predictably, I replied. First shock, then anger, then attempts to negotiate. And no remorse? I could hear the disappointment in his voice. Not a bit, I sighed. Only regret for getting caught. Too bad, Jenkins said after a pause. What did I expect, though? People who could steal from their own father were hardly capable of genuine remorse. We talked some more about the details of storing the remaining watches and plans for a small exhibition in a future museum. Jenkins was enthusiastic, and his energy lifted my spirits a little. After the talk, I sat in my chair with a cup of tea and an old album of photographs. Flipping through the pages, I looked at pictures taken many years ago. Evelyn with baby Lloyd in her arms, little Lloyd on a tricycle, teenage Lloyd with his first award at the school math Olympiad. What happened to that boy? At what point did he turn into a man willing to betray his own father for money? Was it Evelyn and I's fault? We spoiled him too much? Didn't teach him to appreciate hard work and honesty? Or was it just his nature, and there was nothing we could do about it? I didn't know the answers to those questions, and perhaps I never will. Closing the album, I went to the secret safe behind the painting, where I kept the watch dearest to my heart. the same Vacheron Constantine that once belonged to a British officer. I pulled it out, opened the lid, and listened to the quiet, steady ticking of the movement. This watch had survived 2 world wars. It had witnessed human cruelty and nobility, tragedy and triumph. And now it had witnessed another small human drama, the breakup of a family that may never have been a real family. I knew I would never see Lloyd and Prudence again. Even if they stayed in that house and paid rent, our paths had parted forever. And though the thought hurt in the back of my mind, Lloyd was my only son after all. I didn't regret the decision. There are some things you can't forgive. Betrayal was one of them. I returned the watch to the safe and closed it. Tomorrow would start a new chapter of my life. A life without my son, but with a sense of accomplishment to myself and Evelyn's memory. I have protected what we spent a lifetime building together from those who would destroy it, and perhaps taught Lloyd a lesson he would never forget. That some things trust, honesty, respect are worth more than all the money in the world. A lesson that would have been better learned much earlier, but as they say, better late than never. Outside the window, the rain began to fall, drumming on the roof and windows. I stood looking at the gray streams of water and thought about time, about how it flows inexorably, like a clockwork, counting down our days, our decisions, our mistakes and victories, how it puts everything in its place sooner or later. And time has shown me that I was right not to trust Lloyd and Prudence, that my suspicion was justified, that my measures, however harsh they may seem, were necessary. Perhaps someday Lloyd will realize that. Perhaps he'll even learn from what happened and become a better man. But even if that doesn't happen, I did everything I could to protect what I hold dear, and there's no room for regret. The clock ticks, time passes, and life goes on, no matter what.